Hey everyone, welcome to Nerding IO. I'm JD, and today we're going to continue our series on MCP. And we're specifically going to look at what an MCP client is and how to build one in React, as well as look at the inspector that we can use for debugging. With that, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so first what we're going to be doing is we're actually going to be going through our MCP server sent events example. We're going to take what we did last time and we're actually going to expand on it. So make sure that you either clone this repo or you go watch the original video, because we're taking this server that we built and we're now going to put it into multiple different clients. So we're going to take a brief look at Claude Desktop. I'm not actually going to go through all this. There's a good amount of documentation on how to load this one up. But we will go through how you can add an MCP server to Cursor, since that's the tool that we'll be using to actually build things. And then we're going to actually look at the inspector, which is another form of client, and we're going to actually build our own React client. So the first thing is with Claude, this is a desktop application. This is basically how MCP kind of got its start. MCP is an open source through Claude specifically, and it gives you the ability to do different actions, and essentially it gives you a JSON configuration, and then you can actually pass in what your MCP server is, the commands, and the arguments. If you've seen this, it looks very similar to how we did, or how I did the node MCP N8N node, and we're going to be following this kind of same pattern throughout what we're doing. Again, we saw this in the server itself. This is actually an example of a studio, so a standard in, standard out. And what we're going to be doing, though, is we'll actually look at some of the other clients. So there's a lot of different clients. You can see, again, Claude has the most support. We are not going to go through sampling and roots. That actually has more advanced features and is really in the specification if you want to go dig through it. But you can see the vast majority of everything supports tools. And so we're still going to go in a bit further in future videos on what are resources and what are prompts, but we're going to build a client that specifically pulls in tools. And so to do that, one of the best ways is to have our server and actually use the testing tool that we used last time, which is called Inspector. Inspector is actually written by the Model Context Protocol group, and what it does is it's a command line that allows you to spin up a website in order to actually start testing and looking at the resources, the prompts, and the tools that you have available, and test them out in a user interface. They have one for both Typescript and Python. We're actually going to go through the Typescript version. And what's cool about the code base is the MCP inspector code base is all written in Typescript. So they actually have both a server, which is how they actually connect out. So inside the server, it's actually doing a proxy, right? And so this is a pretty common practice where you're actually taking an MCP SSE server and then connecting out to other potential MCP servers. And this way it pulls everything in. But then they also have an example of a client, right? So we could actually go look at the components that they have, whether it be the UI itself or what is actually building the app itself for how a client actually runs. So we're going to spin this up. We're actually going to take a look at our server, and we'll go through some of the examples of the MCP client. Oh, and so first thing I did was we're going to spin up our backend. You can use Docker if you want. We went through that last time. I'm just going to use npm. So I'm npm running in my backend, and I also need to run the inspector. So we're just going to do npxy inspector, and this is going to launch another site where it has the proxy server is actually listening on three 3000, and then the UI is actually through 5173. So there's a reason why that in the first video I actually put my MCP port for my server on 3001 is so that they don't conflict, right? Because the proxy server is always going to be on 3. Real quick, everyone, if you haven't already, please remember to like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Also, please go check out Text Yourself. It's a simple application that I built that helps keep me on track. All you have to do is SMS different tasks and reminders that you need to be sent back to yourself. With that, let's get back to it. And so now we have the inspector running. We also have our server running, and now we can send events through here. So the other thing to note about the inspector is you can actually test standard in, standard out, right? And so you can put in your commands here, your arguments, your environment variables, pass all of this. We saw versions of this, right, through the N8N MCP node. And then all you have to do is connect. So as we saw in the last video, you can actually connect. This is the one that's pointing out to the live server. And we can actually change this to be localhost 2001/SOC and HTTP. And you can see that, like, this is the previous test where it went out to the live site, came a little bit longer. Also, there's authentication. This is relatively new. We're actually going to go through that pretty soon. So now we're going to check our local system, and just for good measure, we're going to refresh and do a fresh connection and connect. And if we look, we can actually get the information that's coming out of the MCP proxy, right? We're actually logging what events are actually coming back. We're validating if we're getting a session so that that session will give us the ID, and we can tell where our messages are going. And it gives you multiple different things, right? So just like we saw on the example clients, really not everything is supported in a lot of these clients, but in the inspector, everything's supported, right? You just have to have the pieces set up. And so that's why prompts isn't highlighted. But you can also ping your server, so actually go out and if there was a ping response, it's going to go out and ping their server just to make sure that it's live, so it's like a health check kind of thing. And then more advanced topics like sampling and roots and stuff. But mostly we're going to sit inside of tools, and now we can actually come in and do our normal kind of executions. We can have our list, we can have our add. This actually gives us the ability to put in variables to actually run and send to our implementation, or to from our client through our proxy to the server. And we can see we actually called our results through our connection. So again, through the proxy and through the backend. We can also do our query. So again, we could do like model context protocol, and we'll just say count of 3, and we'll run. And now we're getting back our results from the Brave search. And again, this is the function name that we have set up in our tool. And I think there's even a I can't remember if I did a default resource in the repo, and we can actually pull this back as well. So again, I'll have another video on resources. We're going to stick with tools. But this is the way that I really like to debug a lot of my servers, whether it be a remote server. You know, we're seeing a lot of different servers that are getting spun up really quick, and we want to see if they're still active. Are they down for some reason? Do we need to have a backup? Whatever. Or are they our own servers and we're actually doing local development? So again, this is a Typescript UI that's built on top of React. And what we're going to do next is we're actually going to go through and build our own React application with the MCP client. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is we'll take a look really quick at the Typescript SDK. And so the Typescript SDK for the SSE client is, I think it's like a couple hundred lines of code, and at its core, right, it is really it has our events and our request headers, which we've used, but at its core, it's a fetch. And so that's why it acts as a really good proxy as well. So we can use SSE to actually call out to other transports and actually send that information down to a command line call if we want. But what we're going to do is we're actually going to look at where did it go? The send function. And so when we look at the send function, this is how we're actually posting those messages through our specification to whatever the post is with our message body, and then we're hoping to get a response back. Again, it's checking if we're authorized and things like that, which we'll look at later. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to get into the code and build some React stuff. So first and foremost, I have this server. I need to get it up and running, so we're going to do, I actually like having a separate port, so rather than doing the default byte, because sometimes it conflicts with the MCP proxy. So I'm going to do a default port with npm run dev and a different port. Now, if we go ahead and spin this up, you saw a little flash there where it'll tell us if we're connected to our MCP or not. And we actually have the ability to look and see if our tools are available. So let's go look at the code. So first, you want to come down to the we can actually look at our components. I only have one component here. I don't have anything in the app. The app file is just one big component. Wasn't going for the best structure, just wanted to show how we can actually do this. So it's not abstracted. So basically what this is, as you can see, I can call out, but you can actually point it to a live MCP client out in the wild, as well as the local. So if we were to change this, we'll actually get an error, and let's see what that does. So if we refresh, we're failing on our MCP, and it's actually giving us an error, so a failed to fetch. When we go back into our transport and we say 3001, we'll actually get a response back. So this is really all I have to set up for the client, right? We're going to set up an MCP client. We need to import, so we have to import our SSE. We also have to import the client, so we have our client and we have our transport. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set up our client that's basically a single client to call out to a single transport server. You could, in theory, like have multiple transports if you wanted, but that's why I think that would kind of clutter this up. I think it makes more sense to actually have a proxy if you're going to have a bunch of different servers that you need to call out to in this. So right now we just have one client that is calling out to one transport and one server, which has multiple different tools on it. Again, we're calling out to our SSE, we're calling to our local host, and then we are actually sending the request parameters that we want. So we want an event stream, so we actually get information back. Then what we need to do is we actually take the client and we are going to connect to that transport, right? So the transport is the SSE that gives us our session. And then we will be able to take back all of this information. So once we have the what I did for capabilities is I took the client and I wanted to see what other information that we could get off of this, right? So if you do dot, it comes back with a lot of different things. You can get the prompts, you can list prompts, you can list tools, resources, templates, whatever. You can get notifications, get instructions, and then on close complete connect, so that you can actually see where the state of things are, right? So that's how we're getting the status of if we're red or green, are we having an error, and are we doing a list of tools? So in our case, we were doing a list of tools, but we could also switch that up. Once we have these capabilities, it'll actually give us an array. That array is going to be of tools. And you can see right here the ZOD that we have. And then we're just going to map. So all I'm doing is looking to see what the tool is, if it has a description, otherwise nothing available, and then being able to set what that tool is if we want to use it. All right, and so if there's an error, then we'll actually send an error in our status. And now we're going to actually look through how do we actually call this tool. So inside of this Brave search function, I actually have just a search handler. And this will allow me to take my client and call out the tool. Again, we're starting to see those arguments and everything that we see when in MCP, right? The name of our function that we're getting from this should be the function name, and we'll get that by looking at our list of tools, right? We have our list of tools here, and then we can change it. We could also add this where we select it, so you know whatever you put in here, right, would give you the this action could pick whatever tool you selected. So again, this is our tool, and then based on the response that we're getting back, we know it's going to be content and then a txt, and we're actually going to show those results. So again, this is not like how you would put it into an agent. This is us building our own client on the web that we can interface into. Again, also a way to test how you're connecting to your MCP. So again, if we do like model context, we can get our results. I have noticed this where it'll like do a 3-2-1 timeout. It means your connection's broken. And also like the 3-2 is really a JSON RPC code, but I think 1 is actually like a custom marker. So you can actually find this information in a result. We could actually send this information to the LLM after the fact to get our tools, or to take the information from our site and return back. So again, and when we're watching the SSE get terminated, we're actually seeing information from the proxy because that's still running, and then we also have this information here about which query is actually being sent. So the last thing I want to show is we talked about come into Cursor. What we're going to do is if you do Command-Shift-P and you do cursor settings, you come down here to MCP, we can actually add the SSE server that we created here. So we're going to do SSE, we're going to go back to our local host. Again, you could use the URL that we pushed in our Docker deploy, and we'll just say local. Now what you can do, you have to have the SSE, and you can add, and you can see it's actually pulling this in. So now if we were to do a new file, Command I, let's get a new chat here, and we'll say untitled, and we'll just say, and that should actually go out to the tool and pull back information from the MCP tool. And like one thing we'll see, okay, so we've got another access point coming in, and so we should have seen something come back. But still, this is how you can actually use MCP in Cursor itself. So again, just pull up and put in whatever MCP rules that you, oh, it says no tools available. It's a little weird. So it definitely seems like there's a little bit of an issue with pulling this back in Cursor. see if we... Oh, now we've got our tools. All right. A little bit of debugging. Let's try this again. Cool. All right. So now it's actually running. We actually saw the thought process here. It wants to use MCP search. We're calling search. We're querying AI news. We can go ahead and run that tool. We're already getting a response. Now we can actually take this into our LLM and ask it any information that we want. And again, this is an example of a client, right? So now we've seen an example of the inspector client, we've seen an example of React, and we've now seen using this in Cursor. All right, that's it for us today, everyone. So what we went through is we actually went and looked at the specification for a client. We looked at some example clients. We also actually looked through the inspector. It's loaded that up. We're able to debug our SSE, and then built our own client in React, as well as took a look at Cursor. And with that, happy nerding.